It is a walkthrough Wednesday. Walkthrough being the fact that nobody's going to hit anything in Indianapolis today. The shoot workouts don't even start till tomorrow. It's all walk from one interview to another, walk from one medical tent to another. Everybody poking and priding and checking things in Indianapolis. And yesterday, Johnny Mac, some of the media assembled in Indianapolis to poke and pride Howie Roseman a little bit. And I don't know about you. You and I discussed it yesterday because we knew it was happening. 1:30, somewhere thereabouts. The GM was supposed to speak, and Nick Sirianni shortly thereafter. I wasn't all that moved by what either one of them said. Maybe it comes because of the expectations I had. I didn't think much was going to be said. I didn't think much was going to be determined, and not a whole heck of a lot of it was. I heard some response on WIP yesterday afternoon, and when I was on last night, and not too pleased were most Eagle fans. What did they really expect to hear? What did you think you were going to get out of Nick Sirianni and Howie Roseman?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, I mentioned on the show, I didn't expect much. They did have an off-the-record session, so the guys who were out there probably got a little bit more from that. At least Howie did. So from that standpoint, but yeah, in front of the microphone, he's too much of a veteran to screw things up. So you asked me about Haason Reddick, for instance. Would he admit, it was about letting other people negotiate the contracts? And I said, no, he won't admit that, even though it is, because it serves no purpose for him. So the goal, is to keep everything on the table. You saw it in Chicago with Justin Fields. Everybody knows they're trading him, but they're trying to keep everything on the table because it doesn't serve them to go in another direction. Say, yeah, we got to get rid of this guy because we're going to take Caleb Williams #1. I mean, it doesn't do anything for them. So the Eagles are no different than anybody else, other than Howie's got more experience than most, so he's better at deflecting things and being, whether you want to use savvy, whatever term you want to use, he's been through this a time or two. So he understands what to do and what not to do, basically.
And what it leaves us with is doing some reading between the lines. And I have no problems doing that. Some people do. AJ Brown doesn't like it when we do it and read between the lines, and feels the need to come out and give you exactly how he sees things. So if anyone is not happy with me reading between the lines, sorry, that's kind of what we do. He did not put forth the ringing endorsement for Haason Reddick. I may end up being wrong with this, and he may end up signing a new contract, and everything's going to be hunky-dory, but the one tangent he went off on is the balancing of what's best for the team right now against what's best for the team in the future. If you're not seriously considering trading a guy, I don't think you say that. I think that's an in advance, cover your backside. Here's what our line of thinking was when we went down this avenue. John, I was kind of hoping it was just Howie's way of doing business. Haason, feel free. Go out and check the market. We owe that to you. You need to go out. And that he had a pretty good grasp about what the market was going to say and thought that his position was pretty strong. Now, remember, he did that before the cap went up. And the cap not only went up because everybody knew the cap was going up. The question was how much? More than most everyone thought. So that probably changes the dynamic some. And Howie may have looked at it and said, yeah, what Jody Mack tweeted last week is right. He's going to be in the 25 million per neighborhood. And even with the cap increase, we don't necessarily want to get into the 25 million per neighborhood. And John, I did come away from Howie talking yesterday. And again, it's far from over. But I think that at least in my mind, the chances of Haason Reddick playing elsewhere next year increased with what Howie Roseman said. How about you?
Yeah, I don't think it was a ringing endorsement as in Haason's going to be back, certainly. And I think you're right. He was asked, what's the best case scenario? And he could have said, well, the best case scenario is we find middle ground and he's back. And he didn't. And he said something about honest communication is the best case scenario with all your players. And that would lead me to think what you're thinking, and that he's going to be too expensive, and the Eagles don't want to go to that point, and they're hopeful of getting something back somewhat significant. And I think that's more likely. I'm not saying it's 95%, but I think, if you're teetering 50-50, I'm certainly on the plus 50 side now that Haason probably won't be back. But yeah, that's reading between the lines, and I kind of read the same thing you did. Um, and I think the hope from the Eagles is that money isn't there for whatever reason. And Hassan was underpaid on the Spurs contract because it wasn't there. So people have a difficult time getting over the size issue and all that kind of stuff. Maybe it happens again. It's something Haason Reddick has been dealing with his entire career. Um, early it was about playing out of position, but once he turned it on his last year in Arizona, it's always been about size. Well, can he really continue to do this? Will he continue to do it in Carolina? Can he really continue to do it? Well, he had his best year ever in Philadelphia. Can he really continue to build on that? He had another good year, not as good, but still very good. Two players in this league have had double-digit sacks for 4 consecutive seasons. So, um, that's why he's got the chip on his shoulder, basically, and understandably so. But the Eagles are, hoping that that 25 million isn't there, and maybe it won't be, but I doubt it at this stage.
Here's where I would hope that the discussion doesn't need to get, but I fear that it will. Is it going to come down to Haason Reddick or Josh Sweat? Because Josh Sweat is going to be due for a contract renewal at some point here. I thought that the drop off for Josh Sweat this year was much more significant than Haason Reddick. Haason Reddick didn't have as many sacks this year as he did the previous year. I would more point to the way that he was used as to that dropping off more than, Haason's now starting to get old and he just may physically not be able to do it. Josh Sweat is younger and had more of a drop off than Haason Reddick did. Are they making a decision internally as to there's only one of these two guys who are going to get up and above that 20 million per mark? Do you actually think it comes down to Reddick versus Sweat?
Not necessarily, because I think they understand, it's a position they value, and they understand you have to pay a premium. And I think ultimately, even if they move on from Haason Reddick, they're going to bring in somebody at a what they consider a more cost-effective rate, whether it's, I brought up Chase Young, who's probably going to have to go the 1-year prove it route. And if you can get a Chase Young, just spitballing, if you can get a Chase Young for 1 year, 15, 16, 17 million, and if he clicks, he clicks. If he doesn't click, you just move on. And again, when I say 1 year, 15, 16, 17 million, he's not going to be 15 million against the cap. You know how he's going to have void years, and make it much more cost effective for the Eagles in the short term. I think they're going to bring somebody in of significance. So it's just about, budgeting and how high you want to go. So I think, edge rusher's a position they value, and they know you got to pay, but, they're disciplined when it comes to the budget. Up and down the roster, that's a high level player. You go down to a Jack Stoll. They're not going to tender Jack Stoll as a restricted free agent. They want him back. And you're talking, I don't know what the number is offhand, about three something million, a little bit over 3 million. They're not going to pay him 3 million, but they'll bring him back at the veteran minimum because they want him back. But you don't have to pay him 3 million. So why would you pay him 3 million? So they're very disciplined from top to bottom. And that I think is more effective than, no, you can only pay one. I think that is a position they know you need. In fact, they want more. For 2 years now, they've been looking for that fourth edge rusher. They want that fourth guy. It hasn't, it wasn't Derek Barnett. He didn't work out. Um, they drafted Nolan Smith. He didn't work out, at least early. And how we talked about getting young players more involved. That was the most interesting part to me, by the way, Jody. There was a little bit of a disconnect there.
Yeah.
Howie's saying, we got to get these guys on the field. Nick came up next and he's like, hey, I'm going to play who helps us win that particular game. If there was any disconnect, that was the disconnect on the podium between Howie Roseman and Nick Sirianni. But from Howie's standpoint, he's like, well, obviously these guys aren't proven. How can they prove themselves if they're not on the field? And you go back specifically to Nakobe Dean. The Eagles were very good at linebacker in 2022, but they could have gotten him sometime. And maybe the startup costs are lowered a little bit. And he got injured anyway, but you get the point. And that's what Howie was trying to say. Well, sometimes you got to play young players. You can't be avoiding it. And
so you agree with Howie on that one, right? That Nick, judging Nick during his 3 years as the head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles, has not done a good enough job through his coaches, if they're the ones who are calling out the guys for substitutions and the like, at giving guys growth time as they develop after they're drafted and they come into the league, that has been a miscalculation by the head coach.
I think overall it's been a little bit. I mean, it's always individual, like Jalen Carter played, because Jalen Carter's immensely talented. So it's always a situation by situation. I'll even go back to Jordan Davis. I thought the Eagles, look, he got hurt as a rookie, I'm talking about. And that's when they brought in Ndamukong Suh and Linval Joseph, more Linval for Jordan Davis. But and also people forget Marlon Tuipulotu also got hurt at about the same time. So it was more than just Jordan Davis that they had to bring in some reinforcements, and nobody cares because it ended up working and they went to the Super Bowl. But once Jordan Davis got back, they didn't play him. I don't agree with that. You got to get a mix. Linval's not going to be here long term. And Ndamukong Suh aren't going to be. You got to mix it. And Nakobe Dean, yeah, you got to. Sorry, like TJ was great that year. I'm not talking about TJ. TJ stayed healthy. That's what you want. But Kaiser White, come on, have him sit a series or two. And Kaiser was solid, but yeah. So it's an individual. Nolan Smith last year. Was Nolan Smith great? No, I'm not trying to say that, but maybe with a little bit more time, he would have started to pick it up a little bit. I think there was a room for that. And then there's the situations where Sidney Brown played out of position because of injuries. I don't necessarily like that. Tyler Steen got one opportunity and then they went back to Suo Peta. I probably would have given Steen a little bit more rope. So it's always an individual situation, but I think more often than not, yeah, they failed a little bit in serving those two masters because you're trying to do both. You're trying to win the game, but you're also trying to develop younger players.
And don't take this as a defensive, Nick, because you and I are on the same page here. Howie's got a point that you're supposed to be winning games and also developing players at the same time. And at least in my evaluation of Nick, since he got here, I'm playing the best guy. I got to win. It doesn't matter to me. We'll worry about tomorrow. I have one duty, and that's today. And I'm going to play to win the game. And I think he overplays his hand there. But I will say this about this season. They didn't blow anybody out. We talked about it so much during the year. They won, but weren't they supposed to win by 2 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns, playing a mediocre team? That's why I got that more ticked off last year at Gannon about Nakobe Dean, because they had 2 touchdowns leads in the second half, and he's still trotting Edwards and Kaiser White out there for every single snap. You're up 2 touchdowns. There's only 2 minutes left in the third quarter. Why not get a guy out there who you took in the third round, who you talked up some reps so that he can get through the starter costs and the like? It was worth last year with Nakobe. This year, even though I think Nick still overdid it, they didn't blow out anybody. They didn't have any big leads. They weren't up 2 touchdowns well into the second half where you say, all right, let's get this guy. Let's give 12 straight reps to Nolan Smith. They didn't really have that.
Yeah, but I'm talking even more so meaningful reps. Like, I'm not talking about blowout reps that aren't important. You know, I get your point. They're easier to do. You probably could, you should have done it. But I'm saying significant reps. I'm saying sit again, not TJ, but sit Kaiser White, you know, every four, you know, it's not a rotational position. I get that, but there's room to get Nakobe Dean involved. There's room to get in meaningful snaps, because I don't care as much about blowout snaps, because I don't think you're going to get much value out of those at that point with younger players. I'm saying they got to play, and Nolan Smith's got to play when it's meaningful. And yeah, is it difficult at times? Yeah. They went through it for years with Fletcher Cox. We got to play Fletcher less. We got to play Fletcher less. And then they would play him more and more, because you get in the game and you're trying to win the game, and you can't have your best defensive player not on the field. So I get it from both ends, but I think they could have done a better job of getting some younger players, and injuries. You know, Ringo ultimately got on the field because of injury and some ineffectiveness, but and Sydney out of position, not necessarily their fault, but early in the season, I argued they should have started Sidney Brown from day one. You probably remember that, because, you know, where are you going with Justin Evans? No offense to Justin Evans, but exactly where you are. One and done. And one and done turned out to be four games and done, because he got hurt again. And if you talk about Terrell Edmonds, he didn't even get to one and done because he got traded. Throw Sidney out there. Who knows where he would have been? Now he got hurt at the end of the season, but you can't legislate that.
Which means you can't even plan him into the mix during this offseason, because you don't know when he's going to be back. One thing you and I do disagree. I think there's no such thing as a meaningless snap. If you're playing snaps in the National Football League, it's meaningful. Some are more meaningful than others. That's rather obvious, but I don't think there's any such thing as a meaningless snap. I think all experience is good experience, and they dropped the ball. Nick dropped the ball on that in a couple of different ways. One other Howie point I want to bring up before we punch up our buddy Mike Gill, who's going to be our first guest. The only mistake, the only misstep I thought Howie had yesterday, and see if you read this the same way I did, he was asked about the championship Eagles, the veteran guys, been there, done that, had a parade. Fletcher Cox, Jason Kelsey, Brandon Graham, and he certainly sung the praises of those guys as well. He should have. But one line that he used did kind of surprise me when he said, and the one thing you don't want to see is them in someone else's uniform. Now, I don't think that matters with Jason Kelsey. Jason Kelsey's either going to be here or he's going to be in a broadcast booth. I don't think it matters with Brandon Graham, because I think Brandon Graham is either going to be here on a, at best, market value deal, and it's not all that high because he doesn't play as many snaps as even usual rotational type guys. So either he's going to come back or he's not. I don't think he's going to be anywhere else. Fletcher Cox at least entertained offers last year and talked to other teams and decided to come back to the Eagles and got good value. I wouldn't say he was overpaid. I wouldn't say he was underpaid. I don't think it was a team-friendly deal, market discount. $10 million is about what Fletcher was worth last year. If Fletcher decides to play, and Howie Roseman is on record in saying, well, you can't let him be in some other team's uniform, that gives Fletcher a little leverage in a negotiation, does it not? Did Johnny freeze up on me?
Yeah, in theory it would be. Did I freeze up on you?
You did, but you're back now.
Got me?
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think that when we talk about reading between the lines, I think, you know, my reading of that was Howie kind of knows it's either the Eagles or retirements for both. And you're right about Brandon Graham. I mean, he's not going anywhere. So mainly talking about Jason and Fletcher.
And
I
do you think
think
Jason's going anywhere? Nor do
no,
I.
of course.
But
no.
you can't tell me Fletcher's a 0% chance he plays for somebody else next year. It's not 0.
Well, that I would have told you it wasn't 0. I would have told you he's more likely to go somewhere else than be in Philadelphia. I think from Howie's perspective, and he has more information than me, I'm saying what I read between the lines is, he's gotten an indication that Fletcher's probably going to retire. That's how I kind of took that. And maybe I'm wrong, but and that's all you're doing is reading tea leaves. But that's what I took from that. I got the take from, oh, that's probably because later in the conversation when Howie was talking about personnel, he was talking about positions and he was talking about the drafts, and yeah, some of those worthless questions, to be honest, about where are you going to go, what you're going to do, things like that. And he mentioned defensive tackle specifically, and he said it's a high value position, but he's being honest. If I'm being honest, he said, this is rare, but he said we got a lot of young talent at defensive tackle, so that's not going to be at the top of our needs list, so to speak. But if somebody drops, even at that position, they'll take them because they value the position that much. But the bigger part to that was me. We got a lot of young talent defensive tackle specific.
If you've got a lot of those talent, you got a lot of those young players.
Saying,
yeah, seems like Johnny's feed keeps freezing up. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take our first break of the day here, Xander. Hopefully we get Mike Gill from down the shore from the Sports Pass, ESPN Radio, to jump in with us. We'll continue this conversation about what was said by Howie Roseman and Nick Sirianni yesterday in Indianapolis here on Birds 365.